What is up, fight fans? Welcome to the MMA Plug on Mile High Sports. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. We've got a lot to dive into this week. It was events galore last weekend in the combat sports world. We're talking the UFC. We're talking Sparta ushering bare knuckle on the local front. One championship had history made over the weekend. There is so much to speak about, and we will get all into that soon enough. But first, I have to give a shout out to the crew here at the Mile High Sports Network. They are the go-to guys for all things in the core forest sports right now. You have football in full swing. The SCO show with Anilo is great, keeping track of all of those juicy Coach Prime, Travis Hunter, Shador type of headlines. You have the NFL in full swing. The NHL and the NBA are kicking off as we are approaching these cold and bitter months. You know, Danny, it's Tuesday, so maybe we don't get snowed every single week the way that we once did. You know, it was
a Wednesday thing. Good point.
It was a Wednesday thing. It was every Wednesday we were just getting dumped on with snow. So hopefully on Tuesday, we might have a little bit more of a better track record at this stage, but we'll see as that winter season plays out. But for all of those winter sports updates, along with rounding out the football season, make sure that you keep it locked on the Mile High Sports Network. Smash that like, share, and subscribe button wherever possible there. You can check them out online on the website, the podcast network, the magazine, or here on their socials. So like I say, smash that subscribe wherever possible. There are a couple of more shows rounding out the schedule for the 2024 frame here along the Front Range. As always, we like to stress the message here. If you could buy the tickets directly from the fighters, please do. If they have an online point of sale system and there's the option to enter their name or the drop down for a code or select them, please do that. That directly helps and benefits them. But to speak on a couple of these events, we have Colorado Jiu-Jitsu Club 23 rounding out the year. That is going to be going down at the Stampede November 23rd. There's such a stat card so far. There is a bracket of a mini tournament within the event. There is high-level competitors such as UFC veterans, the Brundages, both Bobby as well as Cody will be on the card. You have Josiah the Ghost Garcia going to be taking on Bobby Zefriend. Bobby, who was on the show, his fight unfortunately fell through on the LFA card just a couple of weeks ago. He's getting in there and mixing it up with one of the top grapplers in the state. Bobby just wants to compete, and Josiah, being the hungry grappler and ever wanting to put his name into the fire of competition, whether it's gi or no gi guy, he said he's game for that matchup. Well, they're going to run it down on November 23rd. There is, like I say, no shortage of action that's going to be going down with grappling in the cage. Check us out there. Final show of the year for CJJC. That will be at the Stampede. Also at the Stampede, a couple weeks following that, there will be 5280 Muay Thai Fight Series. That's going to be the final show of the year for 5280. Guys, it is the only all-exclusive Muay Thai promotion in the state of Colorado. It's going to be another card that we're looking to pack the venue out there for a Muay Thai matinee on a Saturday afternoon, taking it, just taking it up a level each and every show. The young competitors that we have that have been cutting their teeth through our promotion are just continuing to amplify their performances each and every time. So come check us out. It's going to be a fun show. And as far as what I believe to be scheduled for the last show of the year in Colorado will be Battle MMA Championships on December 14th. That'll be going down at the Norris Penrose Event Center in Colorado Springs. So if you have the opportunity, check them out by all means. Your support for these local shows allows for us to be able to have a scene to do what we do. You know, I know that there's been a lot of shuffling of the deck of some of the rosters on a lot of the local area teams, which has presented some of the complications for cards, matchmaking, all of that. But we still continue to strive as a fight community to give you the best shows as much as possible. And then to also, from the business end of things, provide the best platform for these fighters to go out there and make their case to be able to grow their career, get onto those regional shows like LFA, Fury, and then eventually to a major organization like your Ones, your UFCs, so on and so forth. Transitioning to the weekend recap. The weekend recap is covering last weekend's 100th show at the Apex. Triple digits, guys. We have been at the apex now for 100 shows. I understand that a considerable portion of the first section of those was pandemic times, and that was what was necessary to be able to keep things moving. But as mentioned by UFC executive Mr. Davis last week, they're looking to do more shows in arenas throughout 2025 for these fight nights. And I think that that's what we all want as fans. I think that's what the fighters want. And really and truly, I mean, I hate having the discussion of deserve, but these guys are fighting for the best promotion for fighting that has ever existed. They deserve to have a crowd roaring behind them, even if it's just walking out to the octagon. Feel that energy to get that crowd pop once they hit the curtain, once their music hits. They all deserve to have that feeling. And unfortunately, over the course of the last 4 years, there was a considerable amount of guys who, yeah, they made it to the UFC, but they were out before they ever even had the chance to fight in front of a crowd. Just because of it being apex shows, or then once crowds were back into the equation, they just weren't booked on those particular cards, and now the run is over. So unfortunately, like I say, for some of them, it's it didn't go that well, but now we have the opportunity to have more shows in front of crowds. The UFC continues to pack out arenas, and I would just love to see more opportunities to continue to grow the sport and expand into some of these different markets. I mean, just the fact of looking at some of the rundown of the fight nights from a few of the cards prior to everything shutting down. I mean, you had them going to Argentina, you had them going to Uruguay, they were going to different countries in Europe, to Germany, to Sweden, to so many different sites. Other different areas within the country, just alone domestically here in the United States, there were much smaller markets that they took these fight night shows to. And I would just love for that to come back, because that gives a chance for the actual grassroots development of a fan base to continue to flourish and grow. When you have fight night go to, middle market Oregon, well, that gets so many of these people to come in and be a part of all of the fight week events, that draws the kids in, and you start to develop a fellowship and a fan base that grows on for years and years. I would love to see more of those shows, but that's an entire different point. Again, we're circling back here. This was the 100th show at the Apex. To dive into the action in the main event, it was certainly a bittersweet affair. And I say bittersweet from the standpoint of, just straight up, I'll make no bones about it, I love Neil Magny. Neil Magny is a great guy. He's a Denver-based fighter. He is a solid human being who you can't say anything foul about. I have met countless fighters through the years that Neil has worked with, trained with, coached, cornered, just been in the same gym community of, and you won't find a person who can find anything negative to speak of Neil. He is, when they speak of him being the captain, he is the captain of that squad. And it is because he is just such a good guy, and his presence, or his knowledge and his acumen, he's got other businesses and ventures outside of the UFC. He's tried to help put people on otherwise, and tried to help them figure out, hey, what can I do to make the most of this opportunity and continue to, make the most of what the platform that fighting has given me. Someone like him, who's been around for a decade plus in the UFC, some of the most wins in his division. That's a guy who, it breaks my heart to see him go out that way, especially after he just had a war that didn't go his direction against another young killer a couple of months ago in Miguel Morales. This fight against Carlos Prates, I mean, Prates is arguably right now, it's hard to even call him a dark horse. He is certainly a contender that is one that you will see in the title picture within the next 12 to 15 months. I know that he's just barely entering into the rankings at this stage, but the type of sauce that this guy has, this is almost young Anderson-esque. The way that he is so dexterous with each side and just the kiss of death power that that left hand has, it's special. He has something that is special. The Fighting Nerds arguably have one of the best gimmicks going right now in mixed martial arts. The glasses, it's a beautiful gimmick. It's beautiful marketing for them. More than I would argue to say, the hats from Habib and Marab and those types to some of the other different just fan things that have been put up, the secret juice to whatever. The way that they chose to go about, and this is the brilliance of Kyle Bahalio. Kyle got, I think it was like 3, 4 dozen of the Fighting Nerds style glasses and distributed them at the Apex. The Apex being a smaller, more intimate venue, that few dozen glasses on people in the crowd look like there's a lot more people wearing them. But then also some of the selective people that he chose to put those on, your Jon Joneses and some of the other hierarchy that were there in the crowd, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then Carlos goes out there and delivers that type of highlight reel performance and is just another walk-off victory to a guy who is one of the litmus tests of the division. No, man, Carlos Prates is somebody who you will see at the tops of this division here shortly. He had a bold call out for one of his guys in the post-fight press conference. He called out Jeff Neal. Jeff Neal might be a fight that he actually gets because it's within reach. The other one was Jack Della Maddalena in a couple of months when the UFC returns down to Australia. That might be a little bit more of a stretch as far as the rankings go, but oh my lord, as the inner fight nerd of me and fan, is that something that makes you have a lot of blood flow, if you know what I'm saying. No blue chew necessary. That's a fight that on paper, if we get that, take my money. You could put that as a standalone fight, and I would pay to watch that fight between Jack Della Maddalena and Carlos Prates. Another couple of fights that I want to mention here before we move along from this weekend's UFC Vegas 100 card. You had the debut of former 2-division champion at ONE Championship. Reinier de Ridder took on Gerald Meerschaert. Reinier de Ridder picks up the submission victory, has a post-fight promo calling out ONE Championship, saying to any fighter out there, if you're prospectively looking to sign with them, don't. I think that's a pretty bold claim coming from a 2-division champion from them. Said that the difference in the treatment was night and day from organization to organization. So I guess make of that what you will. But if the 2-division champion of a promotion felt like he was being mistreated or wasn't getting basic level respect within the organization, who's going to get it? That's the question that you have to ask yourself if you're looking at potentially signing with ONE. There was a matchup between a couple of top weight women's straw weights. Jillian Robertson taking on Luana Pineda. We're going to talk a little bit more about that following later on in the program. But Jillian Robertson was definitely not happy with Luana because she felt like she stole her signature red fight kit. Now, Luana was the higher ranked fighter, so she's going to get precedent as far as choice. But yeah, for her having to switch up the colorway, Jillian Robertson went out there and imposed her will, gets the victory, and she moves it along in the winner's column. Her jiu-jitsu, though, and her ground game is absolutely nasty. She's one of my favorite females to watch on the roster just because she is so devastating once she gets the action down to those quarters, and you know exactly what's coming. And there's a lot who can't stop it. So she's one of those who is fun to watch. And rounding out the card, just a couple more to speak to. Trayshawn Gore made his return, and he got a victory. He scored the victory over Antonio Tricoli by guillotine. He's been off for a couple of years. He looks like he's had a lot of physical maturation. When he first came into the UFC, he was still very green, and I still think as a fighter, he's green. But does the kid have potential? Sure. He's just very raw still at this stage, and that was a big win for him. You know, he's now got back-to-back guillotine victories, and he moves it along and continues his upward trajectory in that middleweight division. There was a couple of fights that fell off of that card. Cody Garbrandt and Miles Johns fell off. Ricky Turcios and Sopai fell off. So a couple of unfortunate fan-friendly fights that came off of the card there. But running down a couple more of the events of the weekend before we talk this week's UFC pay-per-view card from Madison Square Garden. You had Sparta Sports and Entertainment ushering in Bare Knuckle with their 104 card over the weekend. There's no official results that have been reported on Tapology, so I'm just kind of going off of some of the social media posts that I saw just to give some of these fighters their flowers, because I believe that they deserve their due and their recognition. You had Dan Wilson getting a victory in his bare knuckle boxing fight. Dan, Dan Wilson is one of the most entertaining striking fighters that we have here on the Colorado scene. It's always an entertaining fight, win or loss, whether it is Muay Thai, boxing, MMA, whatever the case. Dan Wilson thrashes Muay Thai. He is excitement in a package right there for a fighter. You had Tawny Packard successfully defending her 115-pound kickboxing title. The Lalone brothers were both victorious. You had Chris Relentless Alone winning that 159-pound Muay Thai title. Xavier Vasquez won the middleweight MMA title. Zeke Alirez won the vacant 155-pound amateur title. Michael Stack, the younger but larger, like giant clone, almost spitting image of Michael Stack, friend of the program, won in his MMA debut. Macy Adkins got her hand raised. Samuel Enriquez continues to shine. He added another rear naked choke to his resume, but this time his first victory as a pro in his pro debut. Samuel is a bright prospect who, when undefeated as an amateur, all finishes. And guys, his striking is absolutely a fan-friendly and entertaining style and is the best part of his game. But now that he's putting together a few victories by submission, he's rounding out that game and continuously working on that part of his skill set. Look out, because this kid is something that's special as well. In one championship, you had Rug Omar Khan, who he dethroned the triple champ Anatoly Malkin. It was kind of a lackluster fight, wrestle heavy affair, but it's a huge story for the African-born wrestling champ, who was one of the biggest stories in heavyweight MMA a couple of years ago when he signed to one championship, fought Buchecha, a couple of early fights early on, a couple of controversial situations too as well, but I digress. He is now the champion, so that story arc has been completed for that story for Rug. Guys, we're going to transition now and talk this week's UFC pay-per-view card. In the main event, we have a long-awaited battle, highly controversial because there's certainly a fair amount of the fan base out there who want no part of this fight. There's some who certainly do. But nevertheless, we have a matchup this weekend in the main event for the heavyweight championship between Jon Bones Jones taking on Stipe Miocic. Now, Stipe hasn't been active for the entire Venom era, if that puts things in perspective. Taking it all the way back to the last time that he fought and lost to Francis Ngannou. I don't fault Stipe for taking an entire year off after that horrible, terrible knockout that he received at the hands of Francis Ngannou. I don't fault him for that at all. But then it's been a considerable amount of time after that. Yes, I understand that he was supposed to fight last November against Jon, and Jon got hurt. But this is another year removed for Stipe. So are we going to really sit here and think that he is still in a primed condition to go out there while in his 40s and put out a formidable affair against a Jon Jones, who is arguably the greatest to ever do it, albeit that he's aging himself and is coming off of a serious injury? It's a hard sell for many. I totally understand. For me, I want to see it just because it is two names that get to cross each other off of a list and see who gets it done. I understand where the pushback comes from, though. Totally understand. I just don't see outside of a puncher's chance where Stipe gets it done, though, in this fight. Yes, Stipe is a big man. Stipe has a lot of power, and power is the last thing to go. He throws hard, and his power while on his back foot is definitely something that has to be noted here and could be very well how he is able to catch Jon. Stipe is also very aware once he's up against the cage and Jon likes to exit and create angles off of the cage. Is he able to clip him? That's something that we're going to have to see. But we're also going to have to give credit that, I mean, it's just implied to Jon Jones. Jon Jones is the highest IQ fighter that has ever existed. I just don't see how Jon does not get it done in this matchup. Move it along because there's a couple of other fights on the card that I think are absolutely worth keeping your eyes on. You have a co-main event matchup between Charles do Bronx Oliveira taking on Michael Chandler. This is a rematch. Charles Oliveira was able to get his hand raised the first time against Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler, though, obviously the poor guy, he's had to sit on the sidelines for the last couple of years awaiting that Conor McGregor bout that never happened. He kept on waiting for Red Panty Night, Danny. He kept on waiting. He was sitting by the phone, but that dog, that hook wasn't ringing, bro. It was staying right there. So you have to applaud him for being a professional throughout the process. And you know that the UFC certainly took care of him throughout that time. I mean, especially, he did the Ultimate Fighter. He was able to grow some business ventures. And I would argue too that with some of that time off and given his style, that allowed for Michael Chandler to, dare I say, heal up some of the injuries that just kind of accumulate from fight camp to fight camp being continuously going. But again, that was a couple of years in prime years that Michael Chandler lost, where he could have gone out there and continued to put on exciting performances. We're going to talk a little bit more about Michael Chandler and his style later on. But if we have the real Charles Oliveira show up, it's hard to say that this fight doesn't play out the same way that it did the first time. We know that Michael Chandler is going to come out like a bat out of hell. He is going to be a cannonball coming forward in the first round. But with that being said, he's going to leave openings. Charles will get hit. If we know anything, Charles will be able to, or not that he will be able to, but Charles will take a shot trying to give one. Does Michael try to follow him when he lands, or does he play the smart game? That's what we're ultimately going to see. We know that Michael Chandler isn't the highest of IQ fighters, and we will talk more about that later on. You have Bo Nickel making his return to the cage, sitting there in the feature fight, 6-0, taking on the Bear Jew, Paul Craig. This is a grapple-friendly matchup. Paul Craig is not going to go out there and light up Bo Nickel by any means on the feet striking. We know as a whole, collectively, Paul Craig's game is he wants to get you to his guard. Bo Nickel wants to take you down and be on top if he has his choice of choices. He's a world-class elite wrestler. Can the guard play of a Paul Craig, who is as close to a one-trick pony in modern-day MMA as there is, being a guard player and wanting to get that triangle? Mind you, this triangle was what set up the finish and beat guy who was a former champion in Jamal Hill, a title challenger, and Magomed Ankalaev. Has wins over those guys with this triangle. So that's how elite his sub skills are. Does Bo Nickel maybe make an early mistake as his wrestling tendencies may go? And does he walk into something that pressures him into a submission? Who knows? We'll see. We know that Bo Nickel has grappled with some of the best. I mean, just shortly into his jiu-jitsu journey, he was out there competing in rules versus rules, back-to-back, 2 different rule set matchup with the king of grappling in Gordon Ryan. So he's no slouch to the grappling world by any stretch of the imagination. How does the styles clash play out? I'm interested in seeing it, and I'm interested in seeing what is the level of growth that Bo has had since we saw him last in April at UFC 300. A lot of questions to still be answered as Bo Nickel continues to climb. I think that we still might need to pump the brakes on him calling out Hamza Chimaev at this stage of the game. A matchup, or a fighter at least, I should say, to highlight that is opening up the main card that ever since he burst onto the scene, another person from the Fighting Nerds camp who is thought to be kind of early Conor-esque with the flair and with the explosive style, and that's Mauricio Rufy. Mauricio Rufy, he's had a couple of shifts in opponents and a couple of things kind of change up for him in the last few months, but with him getting back in the mix on this Madison Square Garden card, that guy is pure fireworks. He is must-see TV, so yes, make sure that you are tuned in right away for that first card of the pay-per-view. Main event of the prelims, we have Jonathan the Dragon Martinez, number 13 ranked bantamweight, who he's got a tough fight against Marcus McGee. Marcus McGee, a bantamweight coming out of the lab down in Arizona. Jonathan Martinez, he's fought some of the who's who of the bantamweight division. He's been ranked now for a few years. I think very highly of Jonathan. I've spent a lot of hours in the gym with Jonathan. He's that's full disclosure. So, you can't come at me and say, oh, he's a homer, he's biased, or any of these sorts of things, any of that. But Jonathan has a dog in him, and he has a fighting spirit that I think that is, there's some fighters who just have it and some who don't. Some who, when they're backed into the corner, do they kind of fold to the pressure and concede to what is happening? Or are there those who they're going to bite down, and even if it's to their own peril, swing until the last breath? And I think Jonathan Martinez is one of those that falls into the latter category. Obviously, it wasn't the fight result that he wanted against Jose Aldo in Brazil back in May. But review that name one more time. That was Jose freaking Aldo. And I understand that this is an older Aldo. This isn't the prime featherweight WEC early UFC championship reign run of Aldo, but that is still one of the greatest to ever do this. And if you're looking at it from a human standpoint, which is totally understandable, when that's the guy that you grew up your entire life looking at or looking up to, man, that's kind of a tough situation to deal with when, oh, wow, now Bruce Buffer just walked out of the octagon, and that's my idol. That's the guy who I grew up watching, who is now standing across the cage and wants to take my head off. Oh, wow, we're in a fight. Nah, it's totally understandable how certain things can come into play there on a human or on a subconscious level as that matchup played out. I look for Jonathan to come out and have a bounce back performance against a gritty, tough opponent in Marcus McGee, who will bring the fight to him. But Jonathan, with his knee from the southpaw, that rear knee from the southpaw, and with that rear kick, obviously the leg kicks, he being one of the only fighters in UFC history with multiple leg kick finishes. No, I think this is a good opportunity for Jonathan to go out there, show out, get himself back into the winner's circle while doing so on a big card with a big opportunity. You have a bit of a legacy fight here between a couple of dogs long in the tooth, one of them being friend of the program, another one being a former UFC champion. You have the All-American Chris Weidman taking on your boy, Eric Anders. It's the middleweight matchup. This is something that's on the way out the door for both of them. They're both at the twilight stages of their career and looking to go out with some fun fights and making some cash in the process. It's one where I like them both. I don't want to see either one of them go out there and pulverize each other, just because I think that at this stage, Chris Weidman, he had a special where they spoke on how many surgeries that he's had. I don't know why Chris is still fighting, aside from purely the love of the game. At this stage, after all of the horrific injuries that Chris has had, the 20 plus surgeries, a championship reign is out of the equation. Eric has made it known, or he said that he is fighting out his contract and then he's looking to retire and move on to the next step of his life. Make of that what you will for this matchup. Following that, you have a lightweight scrap between a couple of tried and true veterans. You have Jim A10 Miller, the Iron Man of the UFC, the most appearances, a guy who has been around since they were writing with stone and chisel, taking on Damon the Leech Jackson. Damon Jackson didn't have his fight go his way in the last run. He's taking this fight at lightweight, seeing, he's throwing a fresh coat of paint on it, seeing what he could do 10 pounds up. Maybe he's not as chinny at this weight. How that plays out, we'll see. What do you guys think? Does Jim Miller go out there and add to his storied resume? Does he add another finish in the mix? Keep in mind, Jim Miller Just to put it in perspective, for some of you who may not know who Jim Miller is, may not follow the program, or just don't know this little tidbit about Jim Miller, and especially as it relates to his longevity and how long he's been around. He's the only fighter who fought on UFC 100, UFC 200, and UFC 300. So put that in perspective for how long he's been around, the wars that he's been in, and the just total octagon time that he's had throughout the last decade plus. Rounding out a couple more matchups here, you have Marcin Tybura taking on the recently booked Jonathan Deniz. Deniz was recently supposed to fight the Black Beast, Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis was unable to compete medically, so this matchup with a quick booking and return around right here. You also have a welterweight matchup between the once highly touted prospect in Mickey Gall. He got a win in his comeback a few weeks back and didn't look so bad, but he's taken on Ramiz Brahimaj. Brahimaj, another guy who came into the UFC, was a white-hot prospect, ran into some adversity, got the brakes beat off of him by our friend of the program, Max Payne Griffin, and took him a while to really kind of recover from that. If you all remember the infamous or the viral fight where someone got their got their ear literally elbowed off, that was Ramiz Brahimaj. You have Basil Hafez taking on Oban Elliott. That is a welterweight matchup. And then jerking the curtain, you have Veronica Macedo Hardy taking on Eduarda Mora. Hardy was sensational in her last performance. She's had some ups and downs in her career. She battled concussions and some very severe post-concussion symptoms for a couple of years, but it seems like ever since she linked up with her husband, Dan Hardy, and he's really kind of taken ownership of her career and her development programming pathway. She has been on the up and up, and her skill set has continued to evolve, and she looked technically much better in her last fight, so I look to see a strong follow-up effort this go round, but she's got a stiff 10-1 test standing in front of her. Now, guys, I want to talk about something for the next couple of minutes that it's the hot topic across all of MMA, all the MMA pages, the pundits, even the horse's mouth directly in all directions of this conversation have been actively engaged in this particular topic. And that is the Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall drama. All of this talk that Jon Jones is ducking Tom Aspinall and is scared really is kind of crazy to me. It's crazy to me for anyone to say that Jon Jones would be scared of anybody to fight. And even his former foe and longtime heated rival, Daniel Cormier, attested to that exact same notion. Jon's not afraid to fight anybody. But what we need to look at here is some of the layers. One thing that we have always attributed to Jon is that he is a cerebral assassin. And I think that this is another example of Jon playing chess and being his own master of puppets. Is Tom the clear-cut next challenger at heavyweight? Yes, absolutely. There's no denying it at this point. He's the interim champ, and even someone as myself who was late to give Tom Aspinall his roses, he has made himself undeniable. He's as legit of a threat to the throne as there's been since Jon Jones entered the division and claimed it. Jon said that after he beats Stipe, he'd like to fight Alex Poatan Pereira in a super fight because the hype excites him at this stage of his career, and he doesn't believe that Tom has done anything to warrant that sort of opportunity. To a certain extent, this is understandable because if you look back at Jon's resume and who he's fought, the who's who, the all-time greats, champions, challengers, damn near every single fight after the Andre Guzman fight when he first entered the UFC has all been top challengers, elite caliber fighters. Jon, in terms of the actual physical matchup, has never had an easy fight on paper. So when he says, who's Tom? I can if I'm putting myself in Jon's shoes, I can understand what he's saying. And that, who is this guy compared to all of the guys that I fought of years past? Who is he in comparison to Shogun, to Machida, to Rampage, to Glover, to just name your who's who, Gus, so on and so forth. I understand at least the position or where Jon can have that sort of perspective. Doesn't mean that he's accurate to overlook Tom by any means, but he's literally fought everybody outside of Tom or Pereira within this era following Stipe should he win. If he is honest in saying that his clock as a fighter only has one more tick left on the timer and he wants to go out with a fun fight like Pereira, I understand. However, if he does choose to do that fight, and he's alluded to this, he should vacate so he no longer holds up the division, but that's a whole different point in the discussion. At one point, I was in for the Alex and the Jon fight for the title, but Tom has just made himself too undeniable at this stage. All of this is to circle back and say that this could be Jon being a cerebral assassin and giving us a glance at public negotiations for his final send-off. Jon is downplaying this fight and acting as if he does not need it. He doesn't need Tom Aspinall to cement his legacy. He's already the GOAT. Tom needs Jon way more than Jon needs Tom. Tom needs him to be able to try to create his own legacy. Jon is portraying that he's fine walking away without that fight. What does it do for him? Well, this creates a premium on the exclusivity for the value of what a Jon Jones fight is. Jon being the super heel, also that he can be, he's getting the exact response that he's hoping that he would get. In that there is widespread backlash and everybody is clamoring and talking about it. If this is the case, again, he wants there to be so much of a demand for the fight that the UFC has no choice but to pay him. He is no stranger to fan criticism, so he's playing the game and he's building up the drama. The shots that Tom is finally firing right now are what I suggested for him to do a year ago. The fact that Tom is a terrifying prospect, but he's relatively unknown to the masses, is what the issue is. It's not on Jon for Tom to go out there and build his profile. That's on Tom. But Jon brushing him off like he's yesterday's breadcrumbs helps build the narrative for a potential clash, because it creates the interest that, oh, is Jon looking him over? Or, oh, is this something that needs to be had? It creates a discussion that generates potential demand in the long run. We've said it before on this program, and the actual events of history support it. Grudge matches sell. The biggest pay-per-view of all time was a rivalry and an all-time grudge match that still has bad blood that exists and runs to this day. That was UFC 229, Khabib versus Conor. The next two, Conor against Nate 2, Conor against Dustin 2. Both heated grudge matches. You want to remove Conor from the equation? Okay, that's fine. Next one on the list, Usman versus Masvidal. Another grudge match. A lot of unpleasantries filled between those two South Florida-based fighters, which led to the sales that were generated because of it. Both were hot product at that time. I believe that in part, this is what Jon is doing. Another factor in why? He gets paid pay-per-view points. So if he fights Tom, who has no buzz, no hype, no awareness around him, what he ultimately takes home is significantly less as opposed to what he would take home with the fight highly hyped and selling well. The bigger the hype of the fight, the more it sells, the more he gets paid. If this is his final send-off, I ask you the question one more time. Why would he not be trying to make as much as possible? That's why there is easy negotiation leverage for Jon in this equation with the Pereira fight potentially being out there. That fight will sell. The trauma from Chama has taken the UFC by storm this year, and he is the biggest superstar champion on the roster today. Alex's profile and persona, coupled with the chance of making history to be the first guy to ever beat Jon Jones, and if Jon isn't vacated and still holding the title, and that's for the heavyweight title, the chance of making history as the first ever 3-division champion, that fight 100% sells. But this is Jon's leverage to help Tom build his profile and potentially generate a larger payday that says, you know what, you need this fight with me to take, or for Tom to the next level, to put Tom over. Pay me. Pay me. To take the infamous word or line from Goodfellas, F you, pay me. That's exactly what Jon is doing right now. He is setting the stage for negotiations, and he is doing it publicly. I think that we are all getting a lesson from one of the champions right now. Rounding off a couple more things before we head off this weekend, I think it's a bit of a farce. I think that it's probably going to be a lot more of a work than it is a shoot, but you have Jake Paul taking on Mike Tyson. Not going to spend too much time on it just because I don't think the fight should happen. And the sanctioning body, or the people who allowed for this to happen, if it is going to be a full shoot, well, you should meet the firing squad, plain and simple. Rounding out the hour, we have 3 rounds. Got my man Danny Bailey behind the boards over there for me. First round, what do we have?
UFC flyweight champion Valentina Shevchenko and top contender Manon Fior got into a war of words on X. Any thoughts on this potential matchup?
I actually like that they were trading it back and forth on social media. A couple of ladies who otherwise, or especially Valentina, always a very classy and well-represented person in any of her interviews, pretty buttoned up in any of her affairs. But they essentially kind of made this a loser goes home type of matchup. They are saying, like, oh, well, if you lose, you retire type of situation. So, hey, I like the hype that's going into this. It kind of helps build a little bit of fanfare, especially because the masses really don't know who Manon is. And Valentina at times gets coined as a business decision-making fighter who will choose to make the smart route to victory as opposed to the exciting or the entertaining one. But nevertheless, she's the greatest champion in women's flyweight division history. We'll see how that plays out.
This week, Tom Aspinall was complimentary yet also critical of Michael Chandler, saying he's got to be one of the most frustrating people to coach. Do you think this is accurate?
100%. Michael Chandler is an NCAA Division I All-American wrestler who has tremendous grappling tools and scrambling abilities within his tool set. He has elite strength and conditioning, but he fights like a complete retard. Like, there is no sense to what he does. He is at times, he has himself in the perfect position to go out there and win fights or has routes to victory, and he chooses to just say, you know what? Are you not entertained? Is he entertaining? 100%. But I believe that Michael Chandler could have very well potentially made his case closer toward a UFC title if he didn't choose the entertaining route in some of his fights. I mean, we're talking the Dustin Poirier fight. He was beating Dustin, and he had Dustin's back at one point and just chose to go other routes. He does not use his wrestling at all, does not use his grappling. He just chooses to go out there, chuck, duck, throw bombs, and what happens, happens. Not the greatest of strategies, but is it entertaining? Oh, absolutely.
With the new rule change, we have seen a few fighters already use the 12-6 elbow. This last weekend at UFC Vegas 100, Jillian the Savage Robertson landed multiple 12-6 elbows with interesting placement. Did you catch it?
Well, Danny, this is one of those situations where the placement of these elbows, and we're going to run this with the video when we share this here online, but if this were a guy, this is definitely not being allowed because of the placement of these elbows. These are straight like clam jam shots. Sometimes lately we've had some stoppages, some penalty foul stoppages for lady groin strikes. Sometimes we don't. It's kind of an inconsistent ruling, but you had a warning from the referee, watch the spine. There was a hilarious video shared recapping this from UFC strawweights Angela Hill and Jessica Panay. And they said, well, I guess your brown eyes considered part of your spine. But, I mean, it's one of those that the optics of it were kind of funny to see. Like, oh yeah, this was a guy. This is definitely being called for a bunch of 12-6 elbows right to the junk, but wasn't called. And Jillian Robertson did ultimately win that fight. Was that some damage being scored? Sure. I guess the judges were interpreting those elbows elbows as scoring damage, as I got Danny laughing at me behind the boards over here. But just like that, folks, we are all out of time. We want to thank you all so much for tuning in with us each and every week for this original combat sports programming. Let us know what you think. Hit us up on social media. What do you think of the matchups this weekend going down at Madison Square Garden? Do you have a hot take that you just absolutely have to share about this Jake Paul and Mike Tyson matchup? Let us know. We're interested in hearing. You could hit us up at Mile High Sports or me, Jordan Kurtz, at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. Once again, I want to thank my man, Danny Bailey, behind the boards, holding it down for me each and every week. And shout out the rest of the Mile High Sports crew. Smash that like, share, and subscribe buttons wherever possible. I'm Jordan Kurtz with the MMA plug on Mile High Sports, and we will see you next week.